All right, we are live. Polina, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you.
Of course, I'm excited to be here.
All right, thank you so much. So we are, I think we're about 50 episodes into office hours now, and the last 20 or so, we've had guest speakers come on and tell their story and talk a little bit about their process, their business, and while we're having a discussion for about half an hour, 40 minutes, if anyone has questions, drop them in the chat. I'll be sure to come back and we'll spend 15, 20 minutes at the end asking Polina your questions. But Polina, I will give a little bit of an intro, but would then love to get your story in detail. So I discovered your work it's got to be about a year ago now. And Polina is a prolific writer with how would you describe it? A media company? How do you describe your
Let's call it a
business?
media company. Why not?
All right. All right. So the profile is a media company that dives into and explains some of the principles of some of the most remarkable people in the world. So I'll let Polina go into her background, but if you're not already a reader of the profile, highly suggest you follow up. We'll drop all the links and make sure you get involved in that. But Polina, I wanted to start with your background, and maybe the traditional background story often starts with like professional background, but if you could go all the way back, would love to hear your story from scratch, because I think that's just super insightful to hear where people came from before they started working as well.
Yeah, totally. So I was born in Bulgaria, and I grew up. I went to first and second grade there, and then my dad was always like, to him, the United States was. I mean, it was the United States. Like, he had dreamed about this place his entire life because he grew up under communism, etc. But his family, like my grandfather, they came from like a very like radical, like, United States is freedom and etc. So when I was little, he would apply for the green card lottery every single year. So you can apply to the United States, had it. I think Australia had it and Canada had it. So he would apply to all three. He was like, I'm gonna get out of here. So he would send in an application for him and also for my mom, because his chances went up a little bit if he had one more person. So we ended up winning it after years of him applying to this lottery every year in 1999. And he was actually walking me home from school when they had delivered the green card envelope to our neighbor. So they like delivered it to the wrong apartment. And so she was like, "Oh, I think there was something in the mail for you." And I have never in my whole life seen him like ecstatic. Like he was on another planet. So he's like opening, and like we're outside and he's opening, throwing stuff around. He was like, "Oh my God, we got it. We got it." What you don't know is, yes, you win the lottery, but then it takes about a year for them to vet you. You have to go to the embassy, to the U.S. embassy. You have to do an interview. They do a background check, etc. So this whole process took about a year, and we moved to the United States in the year 2000. I was 9 years old, and here they put me in fourth grade because they thought I was some sort of math genius. In Bulgaria, I was failing math. Here, I was like above and beyond what they had seen. So here I am, 9 years old in fourth grade, or eight, whatever, however old I was. I basically am in this new country. I don't speak the language. I don't know how to read or write, and I have no friends. So I don't know about you, Jack, but for me, I'm not a very competitive person, except for when I feel like there's something I love doing, which was reading at the time and still is. But I really loved reading. And when I saw that there were other kids who were better at me than that, like they were so much better and I couldn't do it. I literally was like, I will do whatever I can to be better than you. And so I over rotated, and I just literally, I had this English teacher. She would send me home with these English books, and I would sit down and I would open the Bulgarian dictionary, and word by word, I would translate the whole book until I understood what was going on. And books literally, like, I don't know, I love them. So from there, I really enjoyed writing, in reading, but both of my parents were chemical engineers. So I thought I was going to be a scientist. So in high school, I signed up for the science magnet program. I took organic chemistry, biochemistry, and microbiology in high school. It was really, really hard. And I was really, really bad at the experiments. So every single time I was put in a group with people to do an experiment, they'd be like, oh, we have Polina, she's going to break something, we're going to need to start over. And I was like, listen, I'll make you a deal. You guys do the experiment, I'll happily write the 15-page lab report. So it ended up like, I just really enjoyed the research aspect of it, and I like the writing. So knowing that, one of my friends signed up for the high school newspaper class, and I joined because I was like, I like research and I like writing. I hate talking to people because I was incredibly introverted. Like what you see now is not what I was like at all. So, but then, and what I recently wrote for you about how like the world's most successful people create alter egos. For me, I would never have talked to a stranger under normal circumstances. But the second I had a pen and a notepad in my hand and I was interviewing you for a story, I was like, this is my job. I'm a journalist in high school. So that kind of, I created another identity where I was able to come out of my shell a little bit, ask questions, and I really, really loved journalism. So thanks to that class in high school, went to the University of Georgia, majored in journalism, became editor-in-chief of the Red and Black, which is University of Georgia's student newspaper. In my time at college, I interned at USA Today, CNN, and Atlanta Parent Magazine. Didn't do anything fun any summer in college. and then I graduated and freelanced for USA Today and CNN a little bit, then moved to New York, worked at a media startup called Aussie for 6 months, and then joined Fortune in 2014. And I had been there ever since. But the profile, sorry, I'm just like,
no, you're good. You're good.
So then I started the profile in 2017 as something that I wanted to do for myself outside of Fortune. Never thought it would be a business, never had ambitions for it to be anything but a newsletter that I sent to family and friends for us to discuss like these cool profiles I was reading. And then here we are in 2021, the profile, I'm working on it full time, and I've managed to replace my salary at Fortune.
That's awesome. So what was the overlap between the start of the side project while you were still at Fortune? How long were you doing both?
Yeah, so I started the profile in 2017. And at the time at Fortune, I was just covering entrepreneurship and small business. And then in August of 2017, I started writing Term Sheet, which is Fortune's daily newsletter. And I was doing both for 2 years. 3 years. Yeah.
Awesome. And the process at Fortune, or the subject matter at Fortune, is, I'm just to dig into how you think about structuring the issues of the profile. How has that changed over time? Have you always been producing the type of content you're producing now? How has it evolved from when you started it to now?
Yeah. So in the beginning, I was simply curating. So I was only looking for profiles that I really, that were originally, written. They were deep dives into a person or a company, and they were really well reported. So I would curate 8 or 9 of these profiles and then send it out. That was all the profile was. In 2020, I added 2 new sections, which were audio, like podcasts to listen to, interviews to listen to, and a video section, which were documentaries, video interviews, TED Talks, things like that on individual people. And then I also added my favorite section, which is the profile dossier. It comes out every Wednesday, and it is a deep dive on an individual person. But I literally, for 2 days, I just read, listen to, and watch everything that this person has done, and then compile it into this Wednesday email.
Awesome. I think this is again, part of what we're trying to expose in some of these conversations is like the evolution of the product. So
Yeah.
assuming when you began and you had a full-time job, this is kind of a byproduct of your interest. So you have like, this is a like principle we refer to as selling your sawdust. So it's the things that
Yeah.
you just are interested in, you're already consuming, you're already making notes of, and then all you need to do is find a way to, with as little friction as possible, organize that in a way that you can get it out to other people. How did you, you said friends and family to begin with, like it began as just an email that you like individually soliciting subscribers for. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So if you look, it's still out there on Tiny Letter. I started the first one on Tiny Letter, and I think there's a limit of 500 people. And so I never thought it would grow beyond that. I even had one of my editors at Fortune be like, "Why are you going to start a newsletter? You're not going to get more than 200 people anyway." And I was like,
Mm.
I believed it because that's at the time people had newsletters in 2017, but they were like personal newsletters. In other words, if I was writing at Fortune, I'd be like, I'm going to send you an email, family and friends, every single week of what I've been up to, right? What I've been writing. But the difference with mine is it was still curated, but it wasn't just my articles. I was like, I read a lot. I want to have these interesting conversations with you guys. So I'm just going to put 8 or 9 links in here and we can talk about it. And the cool thing is, if you look back at the first issue, the voice was different. The tone was different. The way I like visualized what the part at the top would be. So I used it to be like, hey guys, I literally think the first one was, what did you have for lunch today? Like it was so absurd. And then the tone began to professionalize as I saw that people outside of my family and friends started signing up. And the first time I saw an email that I didn't recognize, because you got to remember, I was getting like 3 people a week in the beginning to sign up. When I saw an email I didn't know, I was like, oh my God, like I'm
Yeah.
writing for somebody else now. So it is interesting how your voice will evolve, but the meat, like the fundamental premise of the profile is still there.
What's the difference in time investment per issue from then to now?
Yeah. So I used to call it like, I was like, I work on the profile at the edges of time because I had a full-time job and I was writing a daily newsletter for Fortune. So the only day I was not sending a newsletter was Saturday morning. Every single other day I'm writing. And um, the time commitment, it used to be I would read on the subway. So I would read going to work in the morning. Then I would read on the subway coming back, and I would write at night or on the weekend. So Friday nights somehow ended up being my day to just write everything because I had spent the week reading all of the articles. So Saturday I sat down, I wrote everything, and I mean, maybe total, it would take me like 3 hours. And now this is without all the additional sections plus the profile dossier. Now, I mean, it is literally a full-time job. Like I am always either reading something, listening to a podcast, watching a documentary, or writing. And I recently talked to James Clear because I was curious how he thinks about consumption versus production.
Mm.
And he explained that basically he's always, when he doesn't when he hasn't read enough, his writing suffers. So he's always trying to consume information and synthesize it and produce something hopefully useful for people.
And I think this is the most impressive thing about this is the ability to go deep on the individual. So what does it look like when I'm curious about like how you make the decision that this person is,
Yeah.
worthy of study, and then what that process looks like, is it, in what order do you consume the content that surrounds them, or do you have a consistent methodology for that? Or I'm just curious for your process there.
Yeah. So I actually don't typically start with the person in mind. I start with that idea. So I'll start with, for example, I want to learn more about originality and creativity. Well, the person that comes to mind off the top of my head is Elon Musk. He's incredibly original and he's creative. Um, another time I was like, oh, what about how do people make good decisions in uncertain environments? The person who came to mind was Annie Duke. She a professional poker player. She has to make good decisions in uncertain situations. So once I get an idea, I like to find the person that I think best fits that idea. But other times, like for example, recently I was wondering, I was thinking about like how do really rich people, like what do they do with their money, and
Hmm.
who's the best person to like do good in the world than Melinda Gates. So right now I'm working on a profile dossier on her and how she kind of developed, she and Bill developed their mindset around philanthropy and how they approach that. So I'm just like, I'm curious about ideas. And then because basically what I say is I don't learn well just by Googling abstract ideas. I can't type into Google philanthropy and be like, okay, so like it's a very abstract idea in my head.
Hmm.
I learn from people and how they've been able to, through their life, experience those ideas and make them work. That's why in college, when I would take history classes, when we would learn about World War One, I would, even if this wasn't an assignment, I would need to find a person that I could relate to, that I could understand their life in order to better understand what World War One felt like for the people living in that time.
Yeah, the context that like a single lived experience gives is powerful.
Yeah.
Awesome. The when do you ever like begin one of these and then abandon? Like, is it how much is left on the cutting room floor? How do you think about what to include? And I listened to your conversation with Bilal. I thought it was ace, and there was so much in there around how you make decisions about your writing and what to include and what not to include. And I would love for you to essentially repeat that same idea where you're putting your writing through the filter of, you know, I think if you recall what I'm referencing, I would love for you to explain that in your own words.
Yeah. So when I was at Fortune, I learned a really big lesson, which was that being verbose and having a lot of words does not benefit the reader. That is a very selfish act to turn in 17 pages for one article in the magazine, which is what I did at Fortune. And my editor told me, I can tell that your writing, I can tell that your thinking is sloppy because your writing is sloppy. So he was able to tell my mental state from my writing. And I remember turning that draft in and being like, this is the best thing I've ever written. It's so well reported. I talked to so many people. But his point was you need to be very, very precise and intentional with every single word. Make, you can't let um, the reader read seven sentences for you to make one point. You need
Mm-hmm.
to make your one point in one sentence. And that, like, if you read my articles at Fortune, you'll notice they're very, very compact, but every single word carries meaning. And there's so much detail, like rich detail, where you're able to like vividly see these characters and these people and the story. And I've kept that in mind with the profile, especially now because I don't have editors. Um, every single time I write something, it'll start really long. And then I'll be like, all right, we need to like slash this. So I'll cut it down in half. But then even then, I'll go through every sentence and I'll be like, does this need to be in here? Does this make a point? And does this benefit the reader? If it doesn't, I just take it out. I have no problem like cutting my own work. I know some people are very like precious about their writing. I'm not like that at all. And it helps if you keep the person reading it in mind, because you, like, I have so much context, the reader does not. And also the biggest mistake I think I see in people's writing today on the internet, people who aren't journalists, is that they use jargon and they expect the reader to understand it. So when I was writing this incredibly complicated story about Kleiner Perkins, which is a venture capital firm,
Mm-hmm.
I would say things like seed funding and venture capital. And he would stop me and say, that's jargon. Nobody outside of Silicon Valley knows what venture capital is. You need to explain it. And I was like, what? But the idea of clarifying your writing, cutting it, and being very precise with your words really can strengthen any piece of writing. Also reading it out loud, because your ears, what is it? Like your ears will
Read with
catch
your ears.
mistakes. Yeah, that
Right.
your eyes
Yeah.
won't.
Awesome. I love the analogy, and it's like this idea of empathy for the reader, almost because your writing is the product. I think that gives you unique insight too, where like a lot of people, the writing they do isn't the end product, so it's kind of a vehicle for explaining the end product, but the same level of scrutiny needs to be applied to the writing. This idea that your writing, what gets lost in your writing is actually throttling the potential for you to explain whatever else it is you're doing. So I think
Yeah.
when your product is actually what you write, I think you just hone in so much faster. Are there any other like lessons from Fortune that you can recall that were like instrumental in how you write?
Um, let's see. Yeah. So actually, this is more of an interviewing technique, but it does help
Mm-hmm.
because you're probably be writing about the interview. For example, today I published an interview with Carolyn Joyce, who's a 3-time Olympic swimmer. Normally, this is not to say all of them, but normally when you interview athletes, and if you watch interviews of athletes who aren't, Kobe Bryant, a lot of them speak in cliches. They, it's all about the team. It's a team effort. It's very, very, I'm very impressed by sports journalists who are able to write these meaty stories, because it takes a lot, right, to get them to be specific. So athletes, I'm always nervous about interviewing, but Carolyn is a little bit different because she's now also an entrepreneur, and she's transitioned from athlete to entrepreneur. But if you notice how the questions that I ask, I literally start the interview off with, you're sitting in this really dark room with 7 of your other competitors waiting to go compete for a spot on the Olympic team, blah, blah, blah. How did you feel in that exact moment? What was running through your head? The more specific you can be, the better. And it helps because as people, we'll hear cliches like, don't be negative, stay
Right.
positive. But when you hear, I sat in that dark room, I couldn't get my mind to focus on this most important moment in my life, and I'm getting frustrated and I'm getting mad at myself. Like, you're more likely to identify with that feeling than with the feeling of, I just was negative and I needed it to think positively. So in your writing, the more specificity and anecdotes you can include, 100 times, it'll differentiate you 100 times more from anybody else of your peers.
That's a great insight. Just the ability to ask better questions being the differentiator, even as an editor of your own writing, essentially that's a loop of questions in your own head, right? You're interrogating
Yep.
the subject, then you're interrogating yourself. So I think that is like universally useful way to think about producing anything. From the transition, I love what you said at the start about the alter ego and the like, I am a journalist serving as this like, power boost almost, where you can kind of shift into that role. How did you make the transition from Fortune to the profile, and was that confidence instantly there when you are asking questions of people? Or how did you make that transition, and what kind of stumbling blocks did you hit along the way there?
Yeah. So it's interesting when you work for a place like Fortune, because there's like a confidence that comes with the job, right? So I can't walk into a room and be nervous. They'll be like, what the hell? You work at Fortune magazine, aren't you supposed to be? So I kept that in mind, and I've interviewed like Steve Schwartzman, Melinda Gates, all these people that under normal circumstances, I'd be like, oh, but because it was Fortune,
Hmm.
I had done my research. I knew, basically I never got starstruck in any way, or was I not confident. But then when I was like, oh, I'm going to leave Fortune, make no mistake, like I was not fooling myself that people like Melinda Gates uh, only answered my email because my email was at fortune.com. It wasn't Paulina Marinova. So then when I left, I think doing it with the profile, on the one hand, I was really, really nervous. I was like, nobody's going to respond to my emails. I'm going to try really hard, and nobody's going to care. But you find that if you did good interviews with the people while at Fortune or your other job, if you built those relationships, people trust you, and they're willing to have conversations with you no matter where you go. That's why you see these reporters going from the New York Times to GQ to whatever,
Hmm.
and the audience not only follows, but their sources don't give up on them and don't abandon them. So yes, I have to probably be a little bit more persistent and email them a little bit more, and present myself in, I have to introduce myself a little bit more than when I was at Fortune. I'm not just the Fortune reporter now. Like I have to explain why I want to interview them, who I am, why this will be good for them to do. And then you find that sometimes it's good not to have the baggage of your prior employer. Because if another reporter pissed off Elon Musk,
Hmm.
he's not going to talk to me at Fortune because I work at Fortune. But now, with the profile, I kind of have a clean slate, right? Like I can build a new reputation. And I forget who I was telling, but like Vanity Fair went to Elon Musk and they said, hey, we want to interview you for this profile. And he responded with, Vanity Fair sucks. And now that's not because of that reporter, maybe,
Right.
but it is probably because of how he thinks about Vanity Fair. On the other hand, Elon Musk reached out to Tim Urban at Wait But Why and did a month-long
That was incredible. Yeah.
interview thing, with a blogger for a blog. So I think like sometimes it's a double-edged sword, but if the benefit is that you don't have a reputation yet.
And it feels like the tide has been turning, if not has turned already, to where you have these individuals that have so much reach, influence, audience, credibility. I love the reference you made to basically the portfolio of stories that you've already done. So you have this proof of work that is, that functions as like a reason for somebody to work with you. Obviously the Fortune name helps there, but you kind of transcended that at this point, and you are, Polina of the profile. And another thing I've heard you talk about, which I love you to dive into, is this idea of, building a brand under your name, and, the upside and potential downside of that, how you think about, what goes into building a business under your own name, very specifically.
Totally. So to be honest, I'm the type of person, I don't like being the center of attention. I don't like plastering my name everywhere. I'm not that type of person. But I had never realized the power of your name as tying your identity to it. So here's how I used to think about it. I used to think that wherever you work says a lot about who you are. And that's a really big mistake, because when you tie your identity to something external, like a job, some of us do it with relationships. Somebody breaks up with you, suddenly you're like, oh my God, who am I? Because I didn't know myself outside of this relationship. Same with work. I in college had done that. And then when I graduated and nobody wanted to hire me, and I suddenly wasn't the editor-in-chief of my college paper, and I wasn't an intern, and I wasn't a student, there was no label. I was grasping for labels. I was like, I don't know who I am. And my mom was like, well, you're Polina. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. So then I made myself a promise that I would never tie my identity to something that I didn't have control over. In
Hmm.
other words, yes, I loved Fortune. It was an amazing job. They took care of me, they taught me a lot. But that does not mean that in times of uncertainty, I couldn't have been fired or laid off, or something could have happened to me. I got sick. I would lose my ability to write. Like, who knows? But wrapping my whole identity around I'm a writer and editor at Fortune magazine was really, really dangerous. And then when I was making the decision to leave, I told Anthony, my husband, I was like, oh, but like I would be giving up a little bit of like status, right? Like I
Hmm.
walk into a room, people are like, oh, you're an editor at Fortune. And he was like, nothing is more powerful than tying your identity to your own name, which means that when you walk into a room, people aren't like, oh, she works for Fortune. They're like, oh, that's Polina. Like there's a small but very important difference. And like also when you identify yourself with something like your job, you never know if people are actually interested in you for you or if they're interested in you for where you work. I can't tell you the number of times I'll be talking to someone and we're having a great conversation. And then they're like, so, I have this startup and you write term sheets. So like, should I? And I'm like, really? It negates everything. So anyway, with the profile though, because I started it in 2017, with my name, under my name. It wasn't part of Fortune, it wasn't part of anything. I did it genuinely because I enjoyed doing it. When I left Fortune, I had that to fall back on. So that's why I tell people, I talk to a lot of college graduates and I tell them, you don't have a job right now, but just start something, anything for yourself. It doesn't have to be a money making thing, it doesn't have to be a business. You don't need a business model or plan. Just start something for your own mental health that will that you enjoy doing and you're good at it. And I heard Naval say this. He said, uh, do something that feels like play to you, but looks like work to everybody else. And that was writing for me. That was the 15-page lab report nobody else wanted to do, but I loved. So I think if you can find what that one small thing is, eventually it'll get bigger and bigger if you want it to. And you don't have to tie your identity to other than something that you genuinely enjoy doing.
How did how do you think that you arrived at that? Was it completely natural that emerged, the like passion for writing and research? Because I think you kind of have a unique combination of interest there as well. It's not just the writing part, it's also the, feels to me at least, like the research part is like very interesting to you, and the process of editing it down. So I think it's and I think it's another Navalism, the idea of specific knowledge, in that you have, this tangible vocational skill, and then you have this irrational passion for a given subject. It feels like the combination of those two things becomes your thing if you want it to become your thing.
Yes. And you know what's weird? Like, I have been doing the profile probably for my whole life. Like, when I first moved to New York, I was making like $40,000, living in New York City, working at a startup. And I was surrounded by my friends who all worked at banks and investment banks, and they were making insane
Hmm.
kinds of money. And I remember sitting in my apartment, I was like, "Oh my God, like what have I done? Like I don't think I should be here because I'm not on that level. Certain people need to live in here." I had all these crazy thoughts. So then I was like, I need to find people who kind of like didn't know what they were doing, but found their own way. And I landed on Sarah Blakely. And once I heard her story on the podcast, How I Built This, I started going down like a really crazy rabbit hole on the internet. I watched everything, I listened to everything, all that stuff. But I never thought like that could be my job, researching Sarah Blakely's life. Um, but I've always done that because it gives me ideas and I can learn from other people's mistakes, right? I can learn like, oh, and Sarah Blakely is super interesting because at that point in time when I came across her, I was feeling really defeated and I felt like I had made it to New York, but I wasn't doing the thing that I wanted to be doing, which was writing. And when I saw how she went through so much failure to get to where she is, she wanted to be a lawyer. She failed the LSAT. Then she wanted to be goofy. Then she was too short to be goofy at Disney World.
Hmm.
Um, but then she said one thing that's always stayed with me, and she said Spanx wouldn't exist today if I had aced the LSAT. So if she had done well, she wouldn't be the CEO and founder of Spanx. So anyway, I had always done this, but it had never occurred to me that I could like professionalize it a little bit, right? And it never occurred to me either that other people might be interested in learning about these humans I was researching on the weekend. So what I recommend you do is, like you said, you just need a little bit of self-awareness to be able to say like, oh, I already do this and I already like this. How can I turn this into something to share with people? The way to do this is what I call do a content audit for 1 week. Literally just jot down how you spend your time, and you'll see that the things that you enjoy, you spend a lot of time on probably. Um, but by doing that, by just tracking your time and seeing what you do with it, it will inform, hey, maybe like I'm actually pretty good at research, and maybe I'm pretty good at writing, like maybe I should pursue that. I think what most people, we just go through our days and we focus on our shitty jobs, and we're like, I have this is sorry, one last thing, and I promise I'll stop talking.
No,
But
no, keep going.
the thing that makes me the most furious and sad is when I see my friends who are so talented at something that, like, let's say it's knitting, but they're so freaking talented, but they go to their job as an accountant and they hate it and they absolutely just are not happy. And I'm like, why don't you just spend 1 more hour doing that knitting thing? Like maybe open an Etsy store. But like, you just have to understand, a lot of people see it as like, oh, this is just my hobby. I would never
Hmm.
want to do this. But like, if it makes you happy, maybe dedicate just a little bit more time per week on it, see where it could go, and don't waste your life being unhappy at a job.
Yeah, I think you're like tapping into something profound, which is like I've experienced this as well with friends of mine, amazing talent, and they just have this all or nothing
Yes.
paradigm where it's like I either do this or I do that. It's like that's not how it works. Like you do this thing to earn, the money you need to earn to pay your rent until this thing becomes a viable, uh, you know, income stream. Then maybe you can kind of jump over there. But I also think
Exactly.
you do a phenomenal job of like leveraging all these different content platforms to get to connect with your audience. So you do like Twitter is a huge one. I know is it daily YouTube shows you and Pomp are doing?
Yes, with the yep, daily.
They're cool. And I'm just curious for your like philosophy around the things that you publish publicly, or how you think about you know recycling or leveraging the deep work that you're doing. How do you translate that to the front end? I think you do a great job of that, and getting an understanding of how you think about it will be super helpful for people.
Yes. So I think that, for example, I recently wrote that guest post for you, which is 5 characteristics that I've, found that exceptional people have in common. I've already done the work of profiling all these people. All I needed to do is like, let's find the common threads, right? So it's repurposing it, but with a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You caught that?
Mm-hmm. Very good.
um, just like being very intentional about, okay, I have all this knowledge in my head. How do I distill it down to something people, one, will find interesting and useful, but also memorable? And I find that the specific examples, like I told you, are the ones that are memorable, and the rest is like a lot of it you probably already know, but it takes reading about Beyonce being an introvert and using an alter ego for you to be like, oh, interesting, like maybe I could do that. The other thing is that I now so in 2017, I started by curating articles. Now I've moved on to more original content and interviewing people. My next phase is, okay, people come to the profile to learn. Ultimately, the goal is to learn something.
Mm-hmm.
So for the past 2 months, I've been working on this creativity seminar that's happening next Wednesday and Thursday. If you want to join, you should join. It's free. But basically, it's going to be an hour and a half Zoom call where I will try to teach all the things that I've learned about creativity from all these amazingly original and creative people that I've profiled. And the interesting part is that if you type into Google right now, how to be more creative, you'll get 5 full pages of like Google entries from like some random website that's like, you have to be original. And it's super generic, it's
Clickbait
super cliche,
nonsense.
clickbait nonsense. Exactly. For this, I wanted it to be super, super like tangible and practical, like things that you can actually do, not things to just inspire you. So for example, one of the things will be Shonda Rhimes. When she needs something, she recommends a small ritual in order to get yourself ready to write. For her, she knows, like, she doesn't wait to be motivated or inspired. She knows that every single time at like 7 p.m., she sits down, she makes herself some green tea. The mental cue for her is green tea. That means I'm ready to write. The problem is a lot of people do this with alcohol. I used to be one of them. I was like, oh, a glass of red wine, I'm ready to write, but that's not good. So she does it with tea. But the whole idea is to create like these little mental triggers that are like, oh, tea, I'm ready to write. This, I'm ready. So it's training yourself. But it'll be like interesting things like that, where it takes all the work I've done on the front end and distills it down to, hey, like here, let's learn. Like this is a class. Let's take an hour and a half and learn about creativity. And then in the future, I hope to do more of those seminars, like mental toughness, like things that are normally really mushy, but I want to bring the specificity to the mushiness.
Very cool. No, definitely give us the link for that, and we'll make sure we put it
Awesome.
on the notes. Are there any other examples of things that you've picked up and sort of integrated into your lifestyle routine based on the people you've studied and the insights you've generated there? That idea of a creative ritual is powerful. You have any other examples of things that you're using?
Yeah. Let's see. So I think the alter ego is one I talked about. The other one that I also wrote for you is the idea of starting from first principles. So I had always heard that and I didn't get it. I was like, who's to decide what the first principle is? But you find that the most creative people, they ask the question why until they get to a point where that's like a scientific fact. There is no emotion around it. It is just, it just is. So Elon Musk asks why until he like figures out what he needs to do, and he ends up on like, okay, I need to learn physics before I can like figure out rockets. Grant Achatz is this chef that I'm obsessed with, who started Alinea, the restaurant in Chicago, super innovative. He asked himself, basically, anytime somebody said like, because that's how we do it, he said, okay, but like, why can't we do this? One of his most famous asks was, why can't we make food that floats? And they were like, because we just can't. It's food. How is it going to float? He was like, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. So they figured out how to like make this composition of sugar and make it like a balloon, and fill it with helium, and it's food that floats and you can eat it without a fork and knife. So the whole idea is like, for me, the way I implemented that in my life is, when I first started working on the profile full time, people would ask me what my ultimate goal was and what I wanted to do. And I was like, I want to write original profiles. But to me, a profile meant text, a photo, and more text, because that's just the way I've always seen it.
Right.
It wasn't until I saw Brandon Stanton of Humans of New York do that profile on Tanqueray. It was a 32 Facebook post series on this woman's life in her own words. That's a totally different format of a profile that I had thought, but it worked. And it was even better than some of the profiles I had read that were 2,000 words in the New York Magazine. Like, it's just, it forces you to think in a different way. So I've been asking myself, like, what makes a profile a profile? It's not text, it's not a photo, it's not a video. Like, what makes it a good profile? So I'm still trying to figure that out. But as I talk to more people, and as I understand, like, what you can do with the internet, you can play with some really fun formats. I think that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Awesome. And I also wanted to, there's another thing we published a couple of weeks ago about your work, which was The Rock,
Oh,
Dwayne
yeah.
Johnson. He retweeted a profile you did on him, right? Which was just, I think, one of the most incredible examples of, you know, this whole movement of work in public. A lot of people confuse that with, you know, having to, you know, build some technology company and show how the nuts and bolts of it work. But like the fact that that profile was published on an open network like Twitter, and then, you know, amplified by someone like that, is just an incredible example of the leverage and the amount of people you can reach if you do great work. So we'll put that in the bottom as well. But that, like, how did that, that must have been quite an experience getting
So the backstory of that is actually really funny, and it's taught me a lesson. Is that I published that on. Okay, here's the thing. I've done a lot of these profile dossiers, and I talk a lot about avoid cliches, avoid generalizations, and so for the profile dossiers, I try to pick people. Like, I'm working on one right now on Stephen Hawking. They're super, super detail oriented, specific, and, like, you know, nuts and bolts type thing. On the other hand, The Rock is very motivational. So I can't be like, here's his theory for the black hole.
Right.
Like, I have to be like, well, you know, he says sometimes when you see failure, like, you have, it gets a little bit more generic. So I was like, I didn't think it was my best work. So I was like, I'm just going to schedule this for Christmas Eve, when I don't think anybody will be reading.
Wow.
And I tweeted it and I tagged The Rock. And then I went on a walk with my dad and literally hadn't looked at my phone for an hour. And then I just see, like, text messages, calls, like Twitter DMs. And I was like, uh-oh, like, what have I done? My first, it was like a fear struck.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was like, oh, The Rock responded. I was like, what? And he apparently really liked it. But it just shows that you never know who's reading, you never know who's watching. Sometimes I'll get somebody signed up for the profile, and they'll email me, and I'll see the name, and I'm like, is this like that person for real?
Yeah. Wow.
It's crazy, but you just never know who's on the other side. So don't make, you know, just because you think nobody will read it, like, sometimes The Rock may be reading it.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that idea of us being unable to evaluate the quality sometimes as well is like, if it's not in the market, you have no idea whether it's good or bad.
Completely.
So, great lesson. All right, we got a couple questions, Polina. I'm gonna
Awesome.
go through these, and I think our last 10 minutes or so, we may have answered a couple of them, but the ones that are outstanding, I'll try and pick them out. Bram asks, how difficult has it been to become your own editor?
So here's the thing. When I was at Fortune, I was pretty autonomous. Like, I would have editors on articles and magazine stories, but I didn't have any, well, for the majority of the time, I didn't have anybody reading and editing my term sheet essay, which went out to a whole bunch of really important people. So I learned to double check, to go through each word, to fact check. So in college, what we used to do is, when somebody would write a story, you would go through every single fact in the article and check it to say that you've double checked it. So if somebody says the University of Georgia has 35,000 students, as the editor, you would go and you would look it up and you would put a check next to it. That's one of the things when I'm nervous about a story, or there's a lot of, like, things that there's a lot of little small details. I go through every small detail that's a fact and I look it up and I double check it. That's super easy to do. The other thing is read out loud. And the third thing is send it to somebody. They can be your mom, they can be Jack, they can be me. I've edited a number of people's newsletters or whatever. Just have another pair of eyes where they can tell you, oh, this doesn't make sense. And like, I don't have a clue what Neuralink does. Those are the three things you can do to immediately get better.
That's great. Another question. It sounds like you're not starting with the outcome in mind. How is the research guiding you throughout the process? How does the article come together, I guess?
So after I've identified the person, I just literally, like, I will Google a lot. I will look for podcasts, interviews, TED Talks. Like, what I do is I open a Google Doc and I just throw in all the links in there, and then I start going through them. Once I hear something like more than 3 times, I'm like, oh, okay, like this must be very important to this person. I recently, I haven't published it yet, but I did a dossier on Kris Jenner. Oh my God, fascinating life, fascinating person. And then you hear how she talks and the things that she emphasizes and focuses on. Because after, like, you'll notice it with me, you'll notice it with a lot of people. When you do more than one interview, you start repeating the stuff that you think is important for people to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Kris Jenner's is if somebody says no, then that means you're talking to the wrong person. She gets what she wants. Like,
wow. Yeah.
It's a really interesting thing, and then it helps you distill and understand that person better than if you had just listened to one interview or read one article about them. So it's like that with anything in life. The more you hear it, the more you're like, oh, that's how they see the world. Basically, my goal with the research is I want to understand how X person views the world, because I've done various dossiers where one person sees the world this way. Like David Goggins says, I don't care if it hurts, I don't care how much pain, you go out there and do it. And then there's Cheryl Strayed, who says you need self-care and you need time off and you need to sit with yourself and not go through the pain. So it's being able to like understand that people see the world through different lenses and why. It's made me way more empathetic to the people in my own life.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm curious for how that boils down in most cases. Is there like one like big idea that you see that like really shapes someone, or is it a couple? Is it a dozen? How does like are there patterns there that you notice?
Yeah, so the patterns that I've noticed are reflected in the techniques to try section. That's the section where I'm like, okay, this is what this person's about. Here's how they see the world. And here's some things, if this speaks to you, that you can try in your own life. And other times it'll be reflected in the actual headline, right? So Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the most likable person in the world. It was so funny. A bunch of people wrote articles and they were like, the profile has named The Rock the most likely. I was like, okay, I have not named anybody, but that's what I took away from him, right? And then after I published that, I noticed that the thing that The Rock does that's super likable, the pattern that he has, is that every single time he talks to fans on his Twitter account or shares something on his Instagram or my article, he always includes their name. He says Polina Marinova. He That's says, cool, Jack Butcher. He makes sure to use your name because, I mean, if The Rock says your name, you immediately like him, right? So I think it's a very interesting and good tactic.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think the last point I would love to hear from you is this, like, I think this outcome based, or this, how do you apply this person's philosophy to your life, is what makes your writing really great. And I think that is, it's a principle that transcends writing. It's what's in it for me as the reader, and the process of determining, like, is that something that you're getting from examples they give, or the way I the way I understand it after listening to you is you're kind of imbibing those principles yourself and thinking, how would I change my behavior? And then I can kind of articulate that back to the people reading. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes. And I saw somebody in the chat ask like, how do you make sure that you stay away from cliches?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the way you make sure you stay away from cliches, first of all, is go through your writing and delete every single time you say absolutely, or like you talk in absolutes, like for example, like it's all or nothing thinking. So it's like they always do this, they never do that, nobody likes him, everyone likes her, all those things, cut those out. And the reason that I've been able to write the techniques like for myself is because I would hate it if somebody was like, you know what you should do, you should always be happy. And it's like, okay, that literally means nothing. You're saying words but they don't mean anything.
Right.
For me, it's like the way you take, you're more likely to take advice from someone if they talk to you like a human, and they give you practical things you can do. So yeah, by writing it for myself, it appeals to other people because I think I put it through that filter that you just said.
Awesome. All right, Polina, thank you so much.
Cool.
Let's make sure we can get everybody connected with you. Twitter, best place?
Let's do it. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys. And if you have any more questions, just email me or tweet me, or I'm there.
This was awesome. Thank you so much for
thank you, Jack,
bringing the insight to the table. We much appreciate it. Thank you very much. Enjoy the heat down there as well.
I will. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, we'll see you around shortly. Bye-bye.
Bye.